Kendall Oduya, 34 years old and earning a steady $45,600 a year as a United States postal carrier, stood in the narrow hallway of his $760 a month bungalow in Charlotte's No-Da neighborhood. It was 7:18 p.m. on a Tuesday, and the air was thick with the smell of the microwaved lasagna he'd just heated up, a $7.99 Stouffer's special that was his go-to meal after a long route. He was about to call out to his wife Yasmin to tell her dinner was ready, but her voice, coming from the living room, stopped him cold. She was on speakerphone with her mother Judith, her tone a mix of practiced weariness and sharp-edged dismissal he'd come to know all too well. "I just don't know how much longer I can do this, Mama," Yasmin said, her voice carrying cleanly through the still house. Judith's voice, filtered through the phone's small speaker, was smooth and venomous. "Patience, darling. The plan is in motion. You just have to hold on. Is he there?" "He's in the kitchen, probably playing with his sad little dinner," Yasmin scoffed. A wave of heat, sharp and sickening, washed over Kendall. He had spent 10 hours on his feet, delivering bills and letters and packages, his hands aching from gripping the mail tray, his back sore from the weight of his satchel. He had come home, cleaned the kitchen, and made sure she would have something to eat. Then came the words that fractured his world. Judith asked, "Does he suspect anything? You have to be careful. A man like that, they can be unpredictable when their little world is threatened." Yasmin let out a laugh, a sound completely devoid of warmth. It was a brittle, ugly thing. "Suspect what? That I'm finally realizing my worth? That I'm tired of being anchored to a man in a polyester uniform? Mama, please." There was a pause, and Kendall held his breath, his knuckles white where he gripped the door frame. "He means nothing to me. He's a utility, a stepping stone that has served its purpose. Soon, he won't even be that. He means nothing to me." The 4 words landed like stones in the quiet hallway. They didn't just sting, they hollowed him out, leaving a vast, echoing emptiness where his love for her used to be. He was a utility, a tool to be used and discarded. Kendall stood perfectly still, the sound of his own breathing roaring in his ears. He could feel the cheap linoleum floor, cool beneath his $25 work-worn socks. He could see a crack in the plaster near the ceiling that he'd been meaning to patch with a $5 tub of spackle. His entire life, this home he'd tried to build, this marriage he had cherished, was just a line item in a plan he was never meant to know about. He backed away silently, his microwaved lasagna growing cold on the counter, its artificial tomato scent now smelling like decay. He had no idea how right she was. Soon, he wouldn't even be that, but not in the way she imagined. Have you ever felt the ground crumble beneath your feet while you were still expected to stand perfectly still? That's a pain that leaves a special kind of scar. Let me know in the comments if you've ever had to pretend everything was fine when your world was falling apart. The facade of their life had been built on a foundation of such contrasts. Kendall's world was one of tangible, modest costs. His 2011 Nissan Frontier, parked in their gravel driveway, had 189,000 miles on the odometer and a persistent squeak in the fan belt he couldn't quite fix. His favorite chair was a $28 folding canvas one he'd bought at Target, perfect for sitting on their small concrete porch after a long day. He wore the same pair of $79 New Balance postal-approved boots every single day, the soles worn smooth in a pattern that mirrored his daily route through the historic streets of Myers Park and the quiet cul-de-sacs of South Charlotte. His happiness was simple: a cold beer on a Friday night, the satisfaction of a perfectly packed mail truck, the quiet hum of his small house. Yasmin lived in the same house but occupied a different universe entirely. Her world was one of aspirational price tags and quiet contempt for his. She spoke of her mother's $1.1 million Myers Park townhome as if it were the standard, not the exception. She would come home from a shopping trip with a $450 handbag from Nordstrom, placing it on their second-hand $150 IKEA dining table with a sigh, as if its presence was a temporary indignity. "It's an investment piece, Kendall," she'd say, not looking at him. "You wouldn't understand." He tried. He truly did. He'd work overtime, picking up extra shifts, the extra $150 a week going directly into a joint account she managed. He thought it was for their future, for a down payment on a better house, maybe in a neighborhood with more trees and fewer sirens. He didn't know it was funding her weekly $120 brunches with friends he'd never met, and the payments on a pearl necklace he'd only seen in a Zales box tucked away in her closet, a price tag for $22,200 still attached. Her mother, Judith Arsenault, was the architect of this disconnect. She would visit their no-da bungalow with the air of a health inspector entering a condemned building. She'd run a manicured finger, adorned with a $15,000 diamond ring, over a dusty bookshelf and offer a thin, pitying smile. "Kendall, darling," she'd said once, eyeing his worn-out Carhartt jacket hanging by the door, a relic from his college days that cost maybe $80 new. "A man's presentation is his resume. You can't expect to move up in the world looking like you're about to chop wood." He was a postal carrier. His job was to walk, to carry, to endure the sun and the rain. His uniform was his presentation, but to Judith, his government-issued practical life was a source of profound embarrassment. She saw him not as a man providing a vital public service, a black man with a secure federal job and a pension, but as a failure tethered to her daughter. One Saturday afternoon, about 2 months before he overheard the phone call, the kitchen sink began to leak. A steady drip, drip, drip that echoed the slow erosion of his marriage. Kendall, ever practical, went to Lowe's and bought a $12 PVC pipe repair kit and a $20 wrench set. He spent 3 hours on his back on the cold linoleum, wrestling with the corroded fittings. Yasmin and Judith were in the living room, their voices a low murmur. When he finally emerged, triumphant and smudged with grease, a $2 tube of plumber's putty on his nose, Judith looked at him with undisguised disgust. "My goodness, Kendall, do you have to be so manual?" she asked, wrinkling her nose. "There are people you can pay for that. A good plumber might cost $300, but at least Yasmin wouldn't have to see her husband covered in filth." Yasmin didn't defend him. She just looked away, scrolling through her phone, her thumb flicking past images of lives that cost more than he made in a year. "She's right, Kenny. It's a little embarrassing." He felt a familiar pang of shame, the one they were so good at cultivating in him. He looked at his hands, the knuckles scraped, the nails permanently grimed from work and life. These were the hands that sorted her mail, that fixed her sink, that held her when she cried. And they were embarrassing to her. That night he lay in bed next to her, the space between them feeling as wide and cold as the night sky. He could smell her $180 Chanel perfume, a stark contrast to the scent of metal and oil on his skin. He was a man of substance, and they were women of surface. And he was only just beginning to understand that the two could never truly coexist. The foundation of their life wasn't just contrasting, it was cracking under the weight of their contempt. And he had no idea the earthquake was yet to come. The cruelty escalated in small, deliberate increments, like a rising tide of poison. Yasmin stopped calling him Kenny. She started referring to him as "my husband" to her friends on the phone, the words delivered with a theatrical sigh, as if describing a chronic illness. The acts of service that were his love language became targets for her disdain. He'd wake up at 5:30 a.m. to make her a special coffee with the $150 Nespresso machine she'd insisted they buy, leaving it on the counter for her. He'd come home to find it untouched, cold, and bitter, while she held a cup from a 7-a-drink cafe. "Their foam is just better," she'd explain, not meeting his eyes. He packed her lunch one day, a simple turkey sandwich on wheat, an apple, and a small bag of chips, just like he always did. He tucked a note inside that said, "Have a great day." That evening, while taking out the trash, he found the entire lunch, note and all, thrown away in its $15 insulated lunch bag. When he asked her about it, she waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, the girls and I went out for sushi. It was a last-minute thing. I forgot." The sushi lunch, he later saw on a credit card statement he wasn't supposed to see, cost $87. The verbal cuts became more frequent, more public. They were at a neighborhood barbecue, a small gathering of his friends from the Postal Service. David Chen, his union steward, was telling a funny story about a runaway poodle on his route. Everyone was laughing, the air smelling of charcoal and summer. Yasmin, who had been silent for an hour, suddenly stood up. "I need to get some air," she announced, her voice cutting through the laughter. She walked toward the street, her posture ramrod straight. Kendall, embarrassed, excused himself and followed her. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice low. She whirled on him, her face a mask of fury. "What's wrong? I'm standing here listening to grown men talk about dogs and mailboxes like it's the most important thing in the world. My mother was at a charity gala last night that raised $50,000 for the Children's Hospital. The mayor was there, and I'm here, in some guy's backyard, drinking a $12 six-pack of beer and talking about poodles. Do you see the problem, Kendall? Do you have any idea how small this life is?" He had no answer. Because to him this life wasn't small. It was real. It was his friends, his community, the people who had his back. But in her eyes, it was a prison, and he was the warden. He watched her get into her 2018 Toyota Camry, a car he'd co-signed the $24,000 loan for, and drive away, leaving him alone in the fading light. The final betrayal, the one that led to the overheard phone call, was a slow, methodical campaign of erasure. She started moving his things. His framed photo of his late father, a man who had worked 30 years at the same textile mill, was taken off the mantelpiece and put in a drawer. His collection of well-loved paperback novels was boxed up and moved to the garage to make room for her art books, each costing upwards of $100. She was systematically removing any trace of his identity from their shared space, turning their home into a waiting room for her next life. And all the while, her mother's influence was a constant, toxic whisper. Judith would call multiple times a day. After each call, Yasmin would have a new complaint, a new grievance. "Mama thinks we should get the house appraised. She says you're letting the value decline. The house was a rental. Mama says your pension plan is probably not as good as you think it is. You should have her financial advisor look at it." The advisor charged a $5,000 retainer. He was being dismantled, piece by piece, by the two women who were supposed to be his family. The love he felt for his wife was dying a slow, painful death, starved of oxygen, poisoned by contempt. He was exhausted, confused, and heartbroken. He kept telling himself it was a phase, that she was under stress, that her mother was a bad influence. He kept trying to fix the unfixable leaks in their marriage with his simple, inadequate tools. He was a good man being pushed to the edge, and the fall was coming faster than he could have ever imagined. The phone call he would later overhear wasn't the beginning of the betrayal. It was merely the confirmation that the war against him had been raging for months, and he was the only one who hadn't been fighting. The call came on a Monday morning at 10:04 a.m. Kendall was on his 15-minute break, sitting in his mail truck on a quiet street in Ballantyne, eating a banana. His supervisor's name, Marcus Davies, flashed on his phone screen. Davies never called him on the route unless it was an emergency. A knot of ice formed in Kendall's stomach. "Kendall, it's Marcus. I need you to come back to the station. Now." Davy's voice was flat, devoid of its usual warmth. "Is everything okay?" Kendall asked, his heart starting to pound against his ribs. "We'll talk when you get here. It's important." The line went dead. The 20-minute drive back to the main distribution center on Scott Futrell Drive was a blur of anxiety. He replayed every delivery from that morning, every scan, every interaction. Had he missed something? Dropped a registered letter? Had there been an accident? By the time he pulled his long-life vehicle into its designated spot, his hands were slick with sweat. Marcus Davies was a good man, a black man who had worked his way up from carrier to postmaster over 30 years. He was fair, by the book, and had always treated Kendall with respect. But the man waiting for him in his glass-walled office looked like a stranger. His face was grim, his shoulders set. He gestured to the chair opposite his desk. "Close the door, Kendall," he said. Kendall sat, the worn fabric of the visitor's chair scratching against his uniform. The office smelled of industrial-strength coffee and paperwork. Davies slid 3 folders across his desk. They were thin, manila, and looked ominously official. "I've received 3 formal complaints against you in the last 2 weeks," Davies began, his eyes locked on Kendall's. "One from the district manager's office, one from the OIG hotline, and one directly to our insurance underwriter." Kendall's mouth went dry. "Complaints? About what?" Davies opened the top folder. "The allegations are serious, very serious. Falsification of route logs, deliberate misdelivery of mail, erratic behavior on the route suggesting a possible substance abuse problem." The words didn't compute. It was like hearing a weather report for a different planet. "Substance abuse?" "Marcus, you know me. I drink a beer on a Friday, that's it." "I know you, Kendall, which is why this is so troubling." Davies pushed the first letter toward him. It was typed on high-quality, cream-colored paper stock, the kind you buy for important correspondence. The text was precise, formal, and filled with damning specifics. It mentioned him taking an unauthorized 45-minute detour on March 12th near the Gleneagles neighborhood. It cited a specific incident where he allegedly threw a package onto a porch on Rhea Road. It even mentioned a persistent tremor in his hands. Kendall remembered March 12th. He'd gotten a flat tire and had to wait for roadside assistance, a delay that was fully documented in his daily log. The package on Rhea Road had been for a house with an aggressive dog, and he'd tossed it over the fence to avoid being bitten, a standard safety procedure. The tremor in his hands? He'd jammed his thumb a week earlier helping a friend move a refrigerator, and it had been sore. He looked at the other 2 letters. They were nearly identical, using the same phrasing, citing the same supposed evidence. The details were intimate, too intimate. How would a random stranger know he'd jammed his thumb? How would they know the exact timing of his flat tire only to twist it into something sinister? A cold dread, heavier and more certain than anything he'd ever felt, began to settle in his bones. Only one person knew all those details. "Marcus, who sent these?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "They're anonymous," Davies said, his expression softening slightly with pity. "But they're detailed enough that I have to investigate. My hands are tied. You know the rules." Kendall's mind was racing, connecting dots he hadn't even seen before. Yasmin's strange questions about his route, her sudden interest in his pension paperwork, her mother's smug pronouncements about his unstable job, the overheard phone call. He's a utility, a stepping stone that has served its purpose. This was the plan. This was how they were going to get rid of him. Not just divorce him, but destroy him. Strip him of his job, his benefits, his reputation. Leave him with nothing. He took a deep breath, forcing the panic down. "Under the union contract, I have a right to copies of all complaints and any evidence filed against me," he said, the words coming out steady and clear, surprising even himself. Davies nodded slowly. You do. I'll have them for you by the end of the day. Kendall drove home in a daze, the 3 sets of photocopies on the passenger seat of his Nissan Frontier. That evening he told Yasmin he had to work a late shift. She barely looked up from her laptop. The next day was his day off. At 6:47 a.m., under a gray, drizzling sky, he drove his truck not to the golf course or the gym, but to Myers Park. He knew Judith's address by heart. It was on his route. He parked a block away from her $1.1 million townhome, the engine of his $3,000 truck, a quiet rumble in the opulent silence of the neighborhood. It was trash day. He got out of his truck, his heart hammering. He felt like a criminal, but he pushed the feeling aside. This was a fight for his life. He walked down the pristine sidewalk past manicured lawns and expensive European cars. Judith's recycling bin, a massive $80 city-issued container, was at the curb. He lifted the lid. Inside, amongst empty bottles of $60 wine and designer water, was a stack of discarded office paper. And on top, a receipt from a FedEx office store on Providence Road. His hands shaking, he pulled it out. The receipt was dated 3 weeks prior. It was for a single item. 1 ream of classic Crest premium resume paper, ivory, 24 lb. The cost was $42. He stared at the receipt, then at the photocopied letters in his hand. The paper's stock, the creamy color, the subtle texture he could feel even on the copy. It was a perfect match. Judith had drafted the letters. Judith had printed them on her $3,100 home office printer, using paper she'd bought specifically for the task. He stood in the rain on that quiet, wealthy street, a single piece of paper in his hand that was both a death sentence and a key. The betrayal was no longer a suspicion. It was a physical object, time-stamped and itemized. He felt a strange calm settle over him. The grief was still there, a cold, heavy stone in his gut. But now it was accompanied by something else, a quiet, unbending resolve. They had underestimated him. They saw a simple man in a simple uniform. They had no idea that a man who walks the same streets every day learns to see things that others miss. They had made a critical mistake. The 19 days that followed were the longest of Kendall's life. He moved through his home like a ghost, an actor playing the part of a loving husband. This was the hardest part, the strategic restraint his mind screamed for, but his heart rebelled against. Every morning he woke up at 5:30 a.m., the same as always. He made coffee, the aroma filling the small kitchen. He'd watch Yasmin come into the room, her face still soft with sleep, and he'd feel a phantom ache for the woman he thought he'd married. He'd hand her a mug, and she'd take it with a distracted thanks, her eyes already on her phone. He had to force the smile onto his face, a painful stretch of muscles that felt alien and wrong. "Have a good day at the office," he'd say, his voice even. "You too," she'd reply, her attention 1,000 miles away. She worked as a paralegal at a large uptown law firm, a job that paid her $62,000 a year and provided a constant source of comparison to his own menial labor. He played dumb, and it was a masterful performance. He'd come home from work, his body aching, and ask about her day. He listened to her complain about her boss, about the demanding attorneys, about the cost of parking in the city garage, a staggering $250 a month. He would nod, make sympathetic noises, and offer to rub her feet. Inside, a cold, methodical anger was building, brick by brick. Each lie she told him, each casual dismissal, was another piece of evidence he filed away in the fortress of his mind. One evening, about a week into his silent watch, she came home glowing. She was wearing a new dress, a sleek black sheath that he knew must have cost at least $300. "Wow, you look amazing," he said, the compliment tasting like ash in his mouth. I had drinks with my boss and some of the senior partners, she said, twirling in the living room. They were talking about a new litigation team. Mama thinks I should be on it. The pay bump would be significant. She paused, looking at him with an expression he now recognized as calculated pity. It would be nice to finally have some breathing room financially, you know? He knew exactly what she meant. Breathing room for her once his income was gone. That's great, Yasmin. You deserve it. He was gathering evidence, and she was handing it to him, wrapped in a bow. He made a mental note of the date and time, an expensive networking dinner, while she was actively trying to get him fired. The next day, he called David Chen, his union steward. He met him for a beer after work at a small dive bar far from his neighborhood. The place smelled of stale beer and regret, but it was anonymous. In a quiet corner booth, Kendall laid out the photocopied letters. David, a sharp, no-nonsense man with a deep sense of loyalty, read them in silence, his expression hardening with each page. "This is a coordinated attack, Kendall," David said, his voice low and angry. "The language, the timing. This isn't random. They're trying to build a case for termination for cause that would gut your pension and benefits. I know who it is," Kendall said quietly. "It's my wife and her mother." David didn't look surprised. He just nodded grimly. "Okay, here's what we do. The claim about falsifying route logs is the easiest to kill. Every scanner you carry has a GPS tracker. The logs are time-stamped to the second. We can pull the data for the dates they mentioned and show your exact location. It will disprove every single one of their claims." "What about the complaint itself?" Kendall asked. "Can we find out where it came from?" "The one sent to the OIG was an email," David said, pulling out a small notebook. "I can put in a request with National. If it was sent from a home IP address, we can trace it. It'll take a few days, but we can get it." The pieces were coming together. The GPS logs were his shield. The IP trace was his sword. Judith's FedEx receipt was the confession. His next stop was an attorney. David recommended a woman named Imani Adebayo, a formidable family law specialist whose office was in a modest brick building on West Moorhead Street. Kendall wore his best $45 polo shirt and a pair of clean jeans. He felt out of place in the quiet, professional atmosphere. Ms. Adebayo was a tall, elegant black woman with her hair in a crown of intricate twists. She listened to his story without interruption, her expression calm and unreadable. He laid out his evidence on her polished mahogany desk, the letters, the FedEx receipt, the promise of GPS logs, and an IP trace. Her fee was $450 per hour, a sum that made his stomach clench, but as she spoke, he knew it was the best money he would ever spend. "Mr. Oduya," she said, her voice rich and measured. "What they are doing is not just grounds for divorce. This is a textbook case of malicious harm and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The attempt to interfere with your federal employment is a particularly serious offense." She looked him directly in the eye. "The question is, what do you want?" He thought of Yasmin's laugh. "He means nothing to me." He thought of Judith's sneer. So, manual. He thought of his $20 wrench and his father's photograph hidden in a drawer. "I want to protect myself," he said, his voice firm. "I want to keep my job and my pension. I want the truth to come out. And I want a divorce." "We can do all of that," she assured him. "We will wait for the GPS logs and the IP trace. Once we have irrefutable proof, we will act. We will file for divorce. And in the petition, we will cite these fabricated complaints as evidence of a coordinated campaign of harm. We will time it perfectly." For 19 days, he lived a double life. By day, he was the friendly neighborhood mailman. By night, he was a man gathering the weapons he needed to save his own life, all while smiling at his executioner. The strain was immense. He lost weight. Sleep offered no escape. his dreams filled with falling letters and Yasmin's cold, dismissive laugh. But with each piece of evidence that landed in Ms. Adebayo's secure client portal, his resolve hardened. He wasn't just a victim anymore. He was a strategist, and he was just waiting for the right moment to make his move. The final piece of evidence came not from a lawyer or a union rep, but from Yasmin herself. It was the evening of the 18th day. He was in the hallway, putting his work boots by the door, when he heard her talking to Judith on speakerphone again. He froze, his hand on the wall. "He's being so nice," Yasmin was saying, a note of confusion in her voice. "It's almost making me feel guilty." "Don't be a fool, Yasmin," Judith's voice snapped back. "That's what men like him do. They're simple. They sense something is wrong, so they try to placate you with little kindnesses. It's pathetic. Stay focused. Did you book the appointment with that therapist?" "Yes, for next week. The one you recommended? Dr. Albright. Her sessions are $280, Mama. She's the best. She'll document your emotional distress perfectly. By the time we're done, the court will see you as the victim of a neglectful, unstable husband. His reputation at work will be in tatters, and you will be free and clear." Kendall silently pulled his phone from his pocket. He pressed the record button. He captured the last 30 seconds of the call, including Yasmin's final chilling words. "Okay, Mama, you're right. I just need to hold on a little longer. He means nothing to me." He stopped the recording. He had it. Her own voice, her own words, confirming the entire conspiracy. He now had everything he needed. The 19 days of patience were almost over. The storm was about to break. Tuesday morning, the 19th day, dawned clear and cool. Kendall woke at his usual time, 5 a.m. He moved with a quiet, deliberate calm that felt almost surreal. He showered, the hot water sluicing away the last remnants of his indecision. He dressed in his crisp blue uniform. He did not make coffee for Yasmin. He did not say goodbye. He simply walked out the door of the bungalow for the last time as the man she thought she knew, closing it softly behind him. In the glove compartment of his Nissan Frontier was a large manila envelope. Inside was his arsenal. The printouts of the USPS GPS logs for the dates in question, showing his truck stationary for 47 minutes with a work order for roadside assistance, not on an unauthorized detour. A sworn affidavit from David Chen confirming the IP address from the OIG complaint, traced back to Yasmin's work-issued laptop. A high-resolution photo of the FedEx receipt from Judith's recycling bin, next to one of the complaint letters, the paper stock, a perfect visual match, and a transcript of the recording he had made, a conversation so damning it needed no explanation. He arrived at the post office at 7 a.m. and went directly to Marcus Davies' office. The postmaster was already there, sipping coffee and reviewing paperwork. He looked up, surprised to see Kendall. "Morning, Kendall. Everything all right?" "Everything is fine, Marcus," Kendall said, his voice steady. He placed the thick envelope on the desk. "This is my official response to the complaints filed against me. It contains irrefutable evidence that they are malicious and fabricated." Davies opened the envelope and began to read. Kendall watched his face change from professional curiosity to shock, then to a quiet, simmering anger. He saw Marcus's eyes linger on the IP address trace and the transcript of the phone call. When he finished, he looked up at Kendall, his expression one of deep respect. "My God, son," he said, his voice low. "I am so sorry you had to go through this." "The system works," Kendall said simply. "I trust the process." "What do you want to do?" Marcus asked. Kendall looked him straight in the eye. "Filing false complaints against a federal employee to interfere with their employment is a felony. I want to request a formal referral to the United States Postal Inspection Service for a full investigation." Marcus Davies nodded slowly, a grim finality settling on his face. "Consider it done. I'll make the call before lunch." Kendall stood up. "Thank you, Marcus." He turned and walked out of the office, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders that he hadn't realized he was carrying. He went to his locker, grabbed his scanner and his satchel, and went to work. He had mail to deliver. At 10:30 a.m., from his mail truck, he made one phone call. "Ms. Adebayo, it's Kendall Oduya." "Kendall, is it time?" "It's time," he said. "File it." "I'll file it electronically right now," she replied, her voice crisp and efficient. "The process server has his instructions. He should be able to serve Mrs. Oduya within the hour." The strike was coordinated, procedural, and final. 2 truths were being delivered to 2 doors he would never visit again. At 12:15 p.m., Yasmin Oduya walked out of the elegant brick building that housed her therapist's office. She had just spent an hour and $280 crafting a narrative of her suffering at the hands of a distant, unstable husband. She felt confident, justified. She was walking across the parking lot toward her Camry when a man in a nondescript polo shirt stepped into her path. "Yasmin Oduya?" he asked. "Yes?" she said, annoyed. "You've been served." He handed her a thick legal envelope and walked away. Confused, she tore it open. Inside were divorce papers. Her eyes scanned the first page, her breath catching in her throat. Irreconcilable differences. Standard enough. But then she kept reading. The petition cited with excruciating detail a coordinated and malicious campaign to cause professional and financial harm. It listed the 3 fraudulent complaints she and her mother had filed. It mentioned an IP trace. It mentioned a forthcoming investigation by the Postal Inspection Service. Her world tilted on its axis. The carefully constructed image of herself as a victim shattered into a million pieces. She wasn't the one in control. She was the one who had been caught. Her phone rang. It was her mother. At 1:30 p.m., Judith Arsenault was arranging a bouquet of $150 lilies in her marble-floored foyer when the doorbell chimed. She opened her $40,200 custom-made front door to find 2 people standing on her porch. They were not neighbors. They were a man and a woman dressed in professional business attire, with calm, serious faces. "Judith Arsenault?" the man asked. "Yes," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. The man held up a badge. "We're from the United States Postal Inspection Service. We have a few questions for you about some correspondence sent to the USPS regarding the employment of Kendall Oduya. Specifically, we'd like to talk to you about a purchase made at a FedEx office on Providence Road." The color drained from Judith's face. The carefully maintained facade of her perfect, powerful life crumbled in an instant. The law had arrived at her doorstep, and it had not been invited. She had coached her daughter, plotted, and schemed from the safety of her $1,000,000 townhome, never once believing there would be consequences. She had made a very critical mistake. She had underestimated the mailman. The fallout was a cascade of quiet, devastating consequences. The institutional machinery that Yasmin and Judith had tried to weaponize against Kendall turned its full, dispassionate force upon them. There were no dramatic courtroom showdowns, no shouting matches. There was only the cold, efficient process of accountability. First, Yasmin's career imploded. The divorce filing, citing her attempt to sabotage her husband's federal employment, became a topic of sordid gossip at her law firm. The senior partners who valued discretion and integrity above all else were appalled. She was called into a meeting with human resources and the managing partner. She was placed on administrative leave, pending the outcome of the federal investigation. The promotion to the litigation team vanished. Her work-issued laptop was confiscated as evidence. Within a month, she was quietly terminated, given a paltry severance package of $5,000 and an ironclad non-disclosure agreement. Her $62,000 salary was gone. Her reputation in the Charlotte legal community was destroyed. Then came the financial ruin. Her therapist, Dr. Albright, upon learning that her services were being used to construct a fraudulent narrative for legal proceedings, dropped Yasmin as a client immediately, citing ethical concerns. The $15,000 retainer she had paid to her own divorce attorney was exhausted in a matter of weeks, spent on frantic damage control. Ms. Adebayo, on the other hand, systematically dismantled Yasmin's financial claims. The joint account, which Kendall had contributed to faithfully, was frozen. Forensic accountants traced Yasmin's extravagant spending, the $450 handbags, the $87 sushi lunches, the secret $2,200 necklace, proving she had been dissipating marital assets for years. In the end, the divorce settlement was brutally simple. Yasmin was entitled to nothing. No spousal support, no portion of his pension, nothing. She left the marriage with her clothes, her car, and a mountain of debt. For Judith, the consequences were even more severe. The postal inspectors were thorough. They obtained security footage from the FedEx office showing her purchasing the specific ream of resume paper. They secured a warrant to search her home office, where they found the digital drafts of the letters on her $3,100 computer, complete with metadata timestamps. She was charged with 3 counts of making false statements to a federal agency and 1 count of conspiracy. Her high-priced criminal defense attorney, who charged a staggering $1,200 per hour, advised her to take a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to a single misdemeanor count. She avoided jail time, but she was sentenced to 2 years of probation, a $10,000 fine, and 200 hours of community service. The Grande Dame of Myers Park Society, who once chaired charity galas, spent her Saturdays picking up trash along the highway, clad in a bright orange vest. Her friends abandoned her. Her social standing evaporated. The shame was a permanent stain she could never wash away. Throughout it all, Kendall remained silent. He did not gloat. He did not engage. He let the systems he believed in, his union, the law, the postal service, do their work. He received a series of frantic voicemails from Yasmin, each one a snapshot of her descent. The first was angry. "Kendall, what have you done? You are trying to ruin my life. Call me back right now." The second was pleading. "Kenny, please. We can talk about this. It was my mother. She put all these ideas in my head. I never meant for it to go this far. I still love you." The third was desperate. "They fired me, Kendall. They fired me. I have nothing. Please, you have to call them off. Tell them it was all a misunderstanding." The final one was just the sound of her crying, a raw, broken sound that held no power over him anymore. He saved the recordings, then blocked her number. He forwarded the messages to Ms. Adebayo, who added them to the file. They were just more evidence. His life, meanwhile, began to return to a quiet, steady rhythm. The investigation at work was closed in a week. He was fully exonerated. With a formal apology from the district manager, his name was cleared, his route was secure, his pension was safe. The truth had been delivered. 6 months later, the Charlotte sun warmed Kendall's back as he knelt in a plot of rich, dark earth. He was at a community garden in the Villa Heights neighborhood, a sprawling green space carved out of a vacant lot. His hands, the same hands Yasmin had found embarrassing, were covered in soil. He was planting tomato seedlings, their green leaves vibrant against the deep brown of his skin, which was luminous in the late afternoon light. The garden was his sanctuary, a place of quiet growth and patient work. Each plant was a small act of faith, a promise of future nourishment. His $760 bungalow in Noda was no longer a place of tension and silence. It was his own. He had painted the living room a warm, calming gray. He had hung his father's photograph back on the mantelpiece, right in the center. He had bought a comfortable, sturdy $600 armchair to replace the love seat Yasmin had taken. His life was still simple, still measured in modest costs, but it was peaceful. It was authentic. It was his. He had sold the 2011 Nissan Frontier and bought a sensible 5-year-old Toyota Tacoma for $19,000, a truck that was reliable and entirely his own. His finances, once tangled with Yasmin's endless needs, were now straightforward. He paid his rent, his truck payment, his utilities. He put $400 a month into his savings account and another $200 into his retirement fund. He was not rich, but he was secure. He was free. A shadow fell over his plot. He looked up to see Sarah, a woman who tended the plot next to his. She was a teacher, with a kind smile and hair that she wore in beautiful, intricate locks. "Those are looking good, Kendall," she said, gesturing to his seedlings with her trowel. "Trying my best," he smiled back. "My auntie always said you have to talk to them for them to grow right." They worked in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the scrape of their tools and the distant hum of the city. He had not sought out a new relationship, but he was open to the possibility of connection, of a partnership built on mutual respect instead of ambition and contempt. Every morning at 6:15 a.m., he sat on his own front step and laced up the same model of $79 New Balance boots. His route was unchanged, a familiar loop of streets and faces, but the mailbag on his shoulder felt lighter now. He was no longer carrying the weight of his wife's ambition or his mother-in-law's disdain. He was just carrying the mail, letters of joy, bills of necessity, messages of connection. He was a man who delivered the truth in small paper envelopes to every door. And in the end, he had made one final, special delivery to 2 doors he would never visit again, a truth so heavy it had shattered the lives of those who lived inside. You learn eventually that true wealth isn't measured by the price of your car or the square footage of your house. It's not about investment pieces or charity galas. True wealth is integrity. It's the peace of mind that comes from living an honest life, even when it's a simple one. It's the strength to stand up for yourself, not with anger and revenge, but with quiet, unshakable truth. Pride can build a beautiful house, but it's character that makes it a home. And sometimes, the most valuable thing a person can have is a name that is clear, a conscience that is clean, and the freedom to walk their own path, one steady step at a time. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you believe in the power of quiet strength and the eventual triumph of truth, please like this video and subscribe to Love Beyond Pride for more stories of resilience and justice. We all have a story worth telling.